The big news, of course, is this blow-up between President Trump and the FBI. So President Trump, over the weekend, tweeted out that the FBI had been surveilling his campaign during the campaign based on stories that broke late last week from the New York Times that there was an informant who'd been working within the Trump campaign to bring information about supposed collusion between members of the Trump campaign and Russia. And Trump pointed back to his tweet early in 2016 in which he said that he was wiretapped at Trump Tower. Now, Trump himself was not wiretapped at Trump Tower. However, he did allege that he was surveilled during the campaign. It's not clear that Trump personally was surveilled during the campaign, but there were members of his campaign who were surveilled during the campaign. So the reason that I want to clarify all of this is because what you're hearing from both left and right, I think, are overbroad versions of the stories that are actually worth telling. So from the right, what you're hearing is there was a deep conspiracy, a deep state conspiracy to get President Trump from the point when it wasn't even clear he was going to be the nominee. All the way back in March 2016, the FBI was going after Trump's campaign, trying to sink him from the inside. Okay, we'll go through the evidence for that and demonstrate what's true about that and what is not true about that. What you're hearing from the left is Trump obviously colluded with Russia. The members of the Trump team were in bed with Vladimir Putin, and Putin was actually calling the shots from the Kremlin, and he was deciding how exactly Trump should campaign. He was deciding how the campaign would go. So everything was totally above board by the FBI. Okay, so we're going to go through all of the evidence here, and we're going to discuss what is real and what is not. Here is what happened over the last 24 hours. So according to the New York Times, White House Chief of Staff, actually the Washington Post rather, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly plans to convene a meeting between top law enforcement and intelligence officials and GOP congressional leaders to, quote unquote, review highly classified and other information the lawmakers have requested about the FBI's use of a confidential source to aid an investigation of the Trump campaign, a White House spokeswoman said Monday. President Trump met for an hour Monday with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats. The meeting came a day after the DOJ asked its Inspector General to investigate Trump's claim that his campaign may have been infiltrated by the FBI source for political purposes, and amid continued demands from GOP lawmakers that the department produce materials on the person. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that at a meeting, it was agreed that White House Chief of Staff Kelly will immediately set up a meeting with other FBI, DOJ, and DNI together with congressional leaders to review highly classified and other information they have requested. The significance of that was not immediately clear. DOJ leaders have fought vigorously against revealing to Congress materials on the source. They say that if they reveal who the informant was, that will leak to the press. The press basically has already come up with who the informant was. It has not been fully confirmed yet, so I'm not going to mention the name of the informant on the show, but it's pretty obvious who this informant was. Through basic Google searches, you can get the person's name. It was not clear whether they had backed down from their position and would now allow GOP leaders to look at the documents, or whether there would simply be a follow-up meeting for more discussion. So, according to Republicans, there have been two big boo-boos, and these two big boo-boos demonstrate ill will toward the Trump campaign and demonstrate that the Obama-run FBI was actually attempting to get Trump all the way back during the Republican primaries. So these two boo-boos supposedly were the use of an informant to go after George Papadopoulos and to go after Carter Page, two Trump foreign policy aides. Papadopoulos had met in, I believe, April in London with a Russian cutout who was a professor in London who had close ties with the Russians and who had suggested that the Russian government could get information about Hillary Clinton's emails to the Trump campaign. Papadopoulos had run that up the chain. Nothing had happened because of it. But Papadopoulos, obviously, he was apparently bragging about it in front of the Australian ambassador. The Australian ambassador called the FBI. The FBI decided to put an informant on Papadopoulos, is sort of how the timeline there goes. The implication here by Republicans is that all of that was useless, not only useless, counterproductive, not only counterproductive, politically motivated. That if Papadopoulos had been working for Hillary Clinton, nobody would have even attempted such a thing. Okay, that is claim number one. Claim number two is that the Carter Page FISA warrant, which was gotten late in the year, like September 2016, the Carter Page FISA warrant was ill-gotten, that it was gotten on the basis of the Steele dossier. Now, you recall the Steele dossier. I know this all gets complicated, but I'm trying to break it down. The Steele dossier, as you recall, was originally a dossier funded by the Washington Free Beacon that was supposed to uncover Oppo research about President Trump. The Washington Free Beacon was working through a firm called Fusion GPS. Before Christopher Steele, a British spy, signed on, the Washington Free Beacon dropped all of this, and they said, we're not interested in doing this anymore. And so the Fusion GPS group went and got Hillary Clinton's campaign to fund it. At that point, Christopher Steele, who's a British spy, signed on and provided all of this information about Trump. Some of it surely false, some of it likely false, some of it may be true about Trump and Russia. Okay, and Christopher Steele's dossier was supposedly used as the basis for the FISA warrant against Carter Page. Now, Carter Page had been, again, a low-level foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Since 2013, Carter Page had been in the eye of the intelligence community. People in the intelligence community were afraid that maybe he was a Russian spy. He'd been going around basically soliciting money from the Russians, apparently, allegedly. And so they looked at this and they said, okay, well, let's get wiretap on Carter Page. Let's go out and let's get all the information on Carter Page. The accusation being made by Representative Devin Nunes at the House Intelligence Committee, he's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is that the Carter Page FISA warrant was basically trumped up by Democrats in order to get the Trump campaign. So there are two separate claims about two separate people that say that the Trump campaign was targeted in ill-conceived fashion, in corrupt fashion. One was the FISA warrant on Carter Page, which comes about later in 2016, and one is the earlier use of an informant against George Papadopoulos and maybe Carter Page as well at the time. Okay, with all of that in mind, President Trump calls the DOJ on the carpet and he says, guys, I need you to investigate what is going on with the FBI. You need to tell me what's going on. Were they, in fact, targeting me? Now, the New York Times, of course, has suggested that even by Trump going to his own DOJ and asking for an investigation, that this is obstruction. Nonsense. Okay, the President of the United States has plenary power over the executive branch. The executive branch includes the FBI and the DOJ. If the President of the United States wants to meet with his DOJ and order them to investigate something, he certainly can do that. What he can't do, maybe, is tell them what outcome to come up with an investigation. So he can actually tell the DOJ to drop an investigation. That is within his legal power. He can also fire people from inside the DOJ. He could fire James Comey at the FBI. All of that is within his legal power. What could look like obstruction of justice, criminal obstruction of justice, is if President Trump were to come forward and to say something like, I know that you're about to find me guilty of obstruction or you're about to indict me on obstruction. I order you to clear me on obstruction instead. Right? That he cannot do, but anything else he can pretty much do. So the New York Times is whining about this. Charlie Savage of the New York Times says, when President Trump publicly demanded that the DOJ open an investigation into the FBI's scrutiny of his campaign contacts with Russia, he inched further toward breaching an established constraint on executive power. The White House does not make decisions about individual law enforcement investigations. Okay, well, yeah, not so much. Okay, it was pretty obvious from the outset of the Hillary investigation that Barack Obama was never going to allow the DOJ to actually prosecute Hillary Clinton. He said that he wasn't going to interfere. Loretta Lynch said she wasn't going to interfere. And then she was meeting on the tarmac with Bill Clinton in the middle of the investigation. Barack Obama was going on national television saying he didn't see any evidence that Hillary ought to be indicted. Right? None of this spoke to the independence of the DOJ. Eric Holder was calling Barack Obama, he was saying that he was Barack Obama's wingman during his actual service as Attorney General on the DOJ. So the idea that the DOJ is a completely independent agency has no basis in law or fact. Nonetheless, the New York Times says that Trump is doing something unprecedented. Rebecca Royf is a professor at New York Law School who helped write a coming scholarly article on the limits of presidential control over the Justice Department. She says it's an incredible historical moment. Mr. Trump's move is the culmination of a lot of moments in which he has chipped away at prosecutorial independence, but this is a direct assault. It is not a direct assault. There's nothing new about the president calling the DOJ in and saying, I want you to investigate X, Y, or Z. He is allowed to do that. It is an executive branch agency. It is not an independent agency. The U.S. government does not have independent agencies. There are agencies that are under the legislative auspices. There are agencies that are under the judicial auspices, and there are agencies that are under the executive auspices. The DOJ is a constitutional position filled by the President of the United States. He has complete power over the DOJ. Nonetheless, the New York Times is very upset about this. They say almost since he took office, Mr. Trump has battered his Justice Department's independence indirectly, lamenting its failure to reopen a criminal investigation of Hillary Clinton that found no wrongdoing, and openly complaining that Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia inquiry, but he had also acknowledged that as president, I'm not supposed to be involved with the Justice Department. As part of that pattern, he has also denied the account by James Comey, an FBI director he abruptly fired, that the president privately urged him to drop an investigation into Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor. Now, here it is important to recognize a distinction. Right? Trump is not telling anybody to drop the Mueller investigation. He is not telling Rod Rosenstein to actually fire James Comey. To actually fire Robert Mueller. He's not telling anybody to shut down the SDNY investigation into Michael Cohen. He's saying open an additional investigation into something I find corrupt. This is utterly and completely within his power. Okay, he is allowed to do this. There's no question he is allowed to do this. So it is not obstruction for Trump to meet with his own Department of Justice. So that's number one. Number two, it's not obstruction for Trump to actually order the DOJ to investigate the FBI's 2016 conduct. And this is not the same investigation, as I say, as the Mueller investigation. He's not interfering in that. He's not interfering into the SDNY investigation into Michael Cohen, the Southern District of New York investigation into his personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Okay, so for all the talk about this is Trump muddying the waters, interfering, doing something. No. Okay, all of this is